Hello, we are going to study for the Missouri EOC exam, so I hope you have your PowerPoint, and let's continue. I'm going to do this in about 3 segments, so this will be part 1 of 3 going over the basics. The first thing that I would like to show you is the Missouri portion of the exam. 3 simple things: the executive branch, legislative, and judicial branch. It's very similar. We have the 3 branches of government, and you know Jeff City is our capital. The lead executive is the governor. If the governor passes away, the lieutenant governor takes his spot. In the legislative branch, it operates very similarly to the House and the Senate at the U.S. level, except instead of a Congress, we call ours the Missouri General Assembly. And it is bicameral, with the Missouri Senate having 34 members and the Missouri House of Representatives having 163 members. They make the laws for our state. The judicial branch of Missouri is all judicial matters are settled by the Missouri Supreme Court. It is the final authority on state law, and we have 7 members. We also have a 3-tiered system: the Missouri Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and the entry-level court is Circuit Court. Also, in cities, we have what's called a municipal court, and they often deal with speeding tickets and things that would relate to St. Joseph's City Ordinance. So those are the 3 branches of government of Missouri, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. What I'd like to do is just review some basic terminology. Democracy is ruled by the people, and there are several types of direct democracy. Direct, representative, and we called ours a true interest democracy, like the People's Republic of China. But the 2 I want to focus on are the 2 you see in front of you. Direct democracy is the will of the people is translated into public policy directly or by themselves. So what this means is the people themselves participate. So for example, if there is an initiative is like a petition initiative, the people get something on the ballot. A referendum is when a state legislature has passed something and the people want to take it away or override that, and that's called a referendum election. Representative democracy is also known as indirect democracy or a republic, and this is where, because everybody can't participate and it's so difficult like in a direct democracy, we have a republic where we choose representatives to make decisions for us. And that's the most common type that we have today. A republic means that sovereign power is held by those eligible to vote, while the political power is exercised by representatives. So the people vote and put representatives into power, and that is a republican form of government. Representative democracy means a small group of persons chosen by the people will act as their representatives and express the popular will. Representation in the U.S. House is based on population. Each state gets at least 1 representative, and in the Senate there is equal population regardless of state size, so every state has 2 senators. We have 435 in the House, and we have 100 in the Senate. Different forms of government that exist. We did talk in the beginning of the year about the location of power: unitary, federal, and confederate governments. Unitary means there's 1 center of power, like in Great Britain. Federal government means there is a division of power between national and state. And a confederate government is a loose alliance or friendship of states. We also talked about the relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch, meaning a parliamentary or presidential form of government, which I'll describe in a minute. The last area that we talked about is who holds power in government. And this is from a democracy where we have many to a dictatorship where there is 1. And these terms that you see in front of you are reflections of that last category I just mentioned. In a totalitarian government, that is a government which holds absolute power, such as North Korea, Putin, I said, would almost have a totalitarian government, even though it is masked currently as a republic. This is an authoritarian leader. They are an autocrat. Sometimes it's called a tyranny, a tyrant. Fidel Castro, Stalin, those have been examples in the last 100 years of a totalitarian government. There's also where one person exists to rule, and this is called a monarchy. And this is coming from the divine right theory that was a theory where God had given those of royal birth the right to rule. So the definition, government controlled by a king or queen who received their position of power through royal blood. Queen Elizabeth is a perfect example of that today. An oligarchy, government in which power to rule is held by a small, usually self-appointed elite. Not many oligarchies exist in the world today. They have in the past. Sometimes it's by military rule. The triumvirate is one that we have seen in the past that you might have studied in world history. A theocracy is currently what Iran's government has, government in which a god or deity is the supreme ruler, or where religious law is used to govern the country. And in Iran, it is Islamic law, the Sharia, and that is known as a theocracy. Anarchy is the absence of government. So that's just a brief review on several types of these types or forms of government. The category that I mentioned earlier, presidential versus parliamentary, you have to look at how the executive and legislative branches exist, the law enforcing and the law making. If they are co-equal, that means legislative and executive both are important, but they are independent, then you have a presidential form of government. A parliamentary is normally when you see a prime minister or some type of cabinet, and also a legislative branch does exist, but the legislature chooses the prime minister. So this first statement says the executive is made up of the prime minister or premier and that official's cabinet. The prime minister leader is a leader of the majority party but subject to control of parliament. And the prime minister and cabinet only stay in office as long as they are part of the majority in parliament. So this is very typical of what Great Britain has. Over here, this is more typical of the United States, Mexico, Australia. They tend to have this presidential form of government. A couple little things about economic viewpoints in government, laissez-faire or laissez-faire. In a market economy, which is normally a free market, that means no government control, it is a hands-off policy. There's no government regulation or intervention. This was created by or described by Adam Smith in his book, The Wealth of Nations in the 1700s. It would include no taxation or regulation intended to restrict businesses in any way. So again, that is a purest form of capitalism that we have. The roles of government in a market economy, you can just simply go through these, but they indicate things such as protecting property rights, maintaining competition, so there's no one monopoly, promoting goals such as no unemployment or full employment, stabilizing prices, growth, and justice in the way policies are carried out. Two things we'll talk about, monetary and fiscal. But I'm going to go back to monetary first. Just think of the word money in this area. The Federal Reserve is in charge of the flow of money in our economy, meaning they can increase the amount of money in circulation and they can take out money in circulation. How you do that is by raising and lowering the interest rates. If you want little money in the economy, you raise interest rates so it makes it harder to borrow money. If you need to flood the economy with more money to stimulate it, then you lower interest rates so people can borrow more, then the housing market increases, cars, etc. like that. So the money supply is established by the Federal Reserve. One area that we looked at is the elastic clause or the increased power of Congress, and this is known as implied power, and we saw that in the court case McCulloch versus Maryland, where the court basically ruled that the national government does have authority to create a national bank if they desired, which they did in the 1800s. and that's monetary policy. The last portion here, fiscal policy. Fiscal is just going to look at how we get money and how we manage it, and that is in the budget. So we know we pay local, state, and federal or national taxes. The 16th Amendment allows the government to tax our income, and we pay every April. The largest form of income is probably the personal income tax that people pay every year. But we also have corporate taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, death tax, sin taxes that tax certain products like cigarettes, etc. On the spending level, which is associated with fiscal policy, remember the president proposes a budget and then Congress approves it. We talked about how the president uses the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, to create his budget. Congress uses the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, to come up with their figures, and then they go back and forth. But the Constitution says Congress must pass a budget each year. I'm going to end that as part one of the review. Part two will focus on the historical era of creation of the Constitution and its principles.